Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot, chapter 3, Halacha 4. Today we're getting into the Baal Keri. Baal Keri is a complicated issue. We have this in the Torah, in Beurim 23:11, where it says, if there is a man among you who is not tahor on account of it happening at night. So this is referring to a seminal emission, and this is going to have a biblical component, and then there's going to be a strictness that's going to be imposed on Ezra. Now, basically what happens is sometime during the day, the Baal Keri is supposed to go to the mikvah, and you're a tovel yom, and at night you become tahor. Okay, so there were some strictnesses that are lifted immediately after the Baal Keri goes to the mikveh itself, and he does not need to wait for nightfall, but sometimes the Kohanim would actually do the mikveh at night in case they touched the sheretz or something like that. So what happened was, we're going to get into this in a little bit, Ezra's enactment was eventually rescinded. It does not apply today, but it does not mean that it's not going to be reenacted at a future date when the observance of the people is going to be stronger in the time of a Bet HaMikdash. So that's a thing to keep in mind. That and also even in today's day, we should always strive to try to understand the level at what these people were at and where we are today, to try to help us to have more amuna and more connection with trying to do the mitzvot that we do have today with a lot of kavana and strength. So basically, somebody who has this discharge, the Baal Keri, okay, he's tameh, and when you're tameh, you're not allowed to eat truma, you're not allowed to eat kodashim, and you're a tovel yom until the nightfall, and you got to go to the mikveh. Okay, so under Torah law, that's going to be the extent of the restrictions that's placed on you. Okay, when Ezra decreed that the Baal Keri, he has these other laws. These are other fences. One of them is that he should refrain from studying Torah or praying until he immerses himself. So that, let's say you wanted to learn Torah, or you wanted to pray, that basically if you had a seminal emission at night, first thing you would do in the morning is run to the mikveh, and then you would pray after that. That's basically the idea of what Ezra is saying. And the Mishnah is going to be discussing how a Baal Keri who is not yet immersed should recite certain obligatory prayers. Okay, the ideal state is if you are a Baal Keri, that you would go to the mikveh, first thing in the morning, and then you could engage in studying Torah and all sorts of other things. Now, this is going to be also kind of a theoretical, because let's say the guy didn't go to the mikveh. It's sort of showing you, well, what would he be able to do, right? So Mishnah starts like this. Okay, a Baal Keri thinks the words in his mind, and he does not recite the blessings, neither the blessings before the Shema nor those after it. And regarding a meal, he recites the blessings after it. That's going to be Birkat Hamazon, by the way. And it continues and it says, but he does not recite the blessing before it. What would be the blessing before it? That's going to be Hamotzi, okay? And the Hamotzi is going to be said before you have food, or you're, smelling like aromatic there's other blessings of enjoyment too, right? So like if you are smelling like aromatic substances, or you're having like other kinds of food without the the bread, then that would also be a blessing of enjoyment. Okay, and it continues and it says that, but he does not recite the blessings before it. And Rabbi Yudah says he recites the blessings before and after the Shema and a meal. So a lot going on here. And the thing to keep in mind is that while the restrictions that Ezra put in place are not applicable today, that we're striving to really understand the concept of why Ezra put this in place. What's the significance? What's the meaning? Because it's going to help us get closer to Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's going to help us get closer to the Torah and the sages. And we want to understand, spiritually speaking, what's going on, that Ezra cared about this so much. Okay, that even though that it's not the custom today, okay, we want to understand it because we want to better ourselves. We want to get closer to understanding the Torah, and this is part of the Torah, and we want to get the concepts for everything that's fitting in for why these laws would be in place. And in many ways, these are some of the most important ideas that's happening in the generation today. You have a generation of people who, um, where women are, immodest, and men have easy access with technology to movies, and many men, can become, voluntarily make themselves a Baal Keri, and this is a thing of where a lot of unfortunately Jewish men are suffering from an addiction in this, and we want to understand what the problem is, what spiritually is going on that makes this such an issue, that Ezra is saying, well, until you go to the mikveh, you can't even study Torah, you can't pray. So the Mishnah was stating that the Baal Keri thinks the words in his mind, and now the Gemara is going to take over, and it's going to try to identify the words to which this is going to connect to. And it says, what is it that he reviews in his mind? In other words, is it going to be the Shema itself, or is it going to be the blessings that come before and after? And the Gemara is going to answer, and it's going to say, he reviews the blessings in his mind, but the Shema itself must be vocalized. So why would the Shema have to be vocalized? Because the Torah itself says, you shall hear. You're supposed to hear the Shema. And the Shema is saying, hear, O Israel, right? So it always comes back to this question of, well, what happens if you didn't hear it? Did you discharge the obligation, right? And that's the opinion that we covered with Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi was the opinion that you even have to hear it because the Shema itself says, hear, O Israel. So in this case, again, part of this is going to be D'Rabbanan by Ezra, so that that part has to be vocalized, but the other blessings that are going to come before and after are going to be in his mind. It's not going to be said outright. So, we know that the Shema itself is biblically mandated, and that's going to be a key part. Now, what about other blessings? With the Shema, some of these, we established are going to be of rabbinic origin, right? So, that's going to be a case where those are going to be permitted for mental review, and there's no prohibition against a Baal Keri reviewing words of Torah and prayer in his mind. But says the Haredim, Ezra's enactment was only to vocalize them. So you can't vocalize them, but you can say them mentally. And part of why those parts you can say mentally was that those parts were Derabanan, and that this part of saying the Shema itself is going to be Deraita. So the Deraita part has to be, or should be, vocalized. Again, we got into a dispute where it's a Maloket Tanayim, where what happens if you don't hear it. Tanakama say that you've still discharged the obligation, but Rabbi Yossi says you do not. Anyway, you want to vocalize the Shema, and it's always better to do that. So the Bavli parallel in 21b is going to ask a question. Okay, this is going to be from Derech Eretz Rabbah, and these are halachot, and it's going to ask a question. It's going to say from the Bavli, it's going to say, since the blessings of the Shema are only rabbinic, why does Rabbi Yehuda let a Baal Keri vocalize them? And it answers that according to Rabbi Yehuda, a Baal Keri is forbidden only to become involved in Torah study, and he treats the Shema blessings like the laws of Derech Eretz. And just as he permits a Baal Keri to say these laws, since they are straightforward, they do not require mental exertion, so he does allow the Baal Keri to say the blessings of the Shema. And I just want to point out here that the Yerushalmi here is explaining the Tanakama statement that the Baal Keri thinks the words in his mind, and that's going to be referring to the blessings of the Shema. And over there in the Bavli, it's referring to the Shema itself, so that the Tanakama is holding that the Baal Keri reviews the Shema and Berechot his own mentally, and so that's a bit of a difference between the two. And the Gemara is going to elaborate now on the Mishnah, and the Gemara says the Mishnah speaks of a place where there is no water in which the Baal Keri can immerse himself. So the Rosh Cirilio says that if water were available, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that a Baal Keri may not recite the Shema or any of the blessings until he has immersed himself. So this is one of those wrinkles that, why you can't, poskin off of the Mishnah. And, where do you know that this has to do where there's no water, where the Mishnah is talking about a place with no water? That's why you need the oral law and the transmission, all the way down from Moshe Rabbeinu through this chain of transmission, because there's no place here where you can figure out that this is talking about a place where there's no water. But it is, okay? This is what it's talking about, okay? You need the Amorim and the Tanaim to hold your hand and to explain this stuff to you so that you understand what is the transmission. And now you can start to understand the law. In fact, really, there's no disagreement at all with what Rabbi Yehuda is talking about. They're talking about two different things. They're talking about a place where there's no water, and that even in that case, Rabbi Yehuda would agree, as explained by the Haredim, or the Rosh Cirilio. So, very key idea here, very key example on why you can't poskin off of these, and why you need the explanation of the sages in order to figure out what's going on here. And the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say that, and the Tanakama follows Rabbi Meir, whose opinion is recorded in the following Brisa. And it says, which states, if a Baal Keri does not have water in which to immerse himself, he should recite the Shema with his lips, but he should not make it audible to his ear, and he does not recite the blessings that go before and after with his lips, even inaudibly, neither the blessings before the Shema nor the blessings after it. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Gemara says, but the sages say he should recite the Shema with his lips and make it audible to the ear, and he should recite with his lips the blessings before the Shema and after, but not make it audible to the ear. So slight nuance changes here, differences here. The Haredim explains about this as follows. He's saying that um, you know, in this case, he's reviewing the blessings of the Shema in his mind, as the Tanna Kama ruled in the Mishnah. The sages are maintaining, says the Haredim, that one does not follow the mitzvah of reciting the Shema unless he makes the words audible to his ear, and therefore they rule that even the Baal Keri must recite the Shema loud enough that he can hear it. And the sages follow Rabbi Yehuda and the Mishnah, who permit a Baal Keri to vocalize even the blessings of the Shema. However, they maintain that he must vocalize them without the sound reaching his ears, since in regards to these blessings, the sages agree that a recitation satisfies this obligation. That's the Haredim. So Haredim points out the following. It says that it emerges that Rabbi Meir and the sages agree on 2 points. Okay, so they're actually agreeing on a lot of it, but they disagree on 2 points. Okay, so the disagreement is whether somebody who recites the Shema inaudibly fulfills the obligation. And again, we covered that with Rabbi Yossi and the Tanna Kama. Rabbi Yossi also thought that you have to hear it, okay? And the Tanna Kama said no. And that we covered already in chapter 1 of Berechot. I'm sorry, chapter 2 of Berechot. And the other case, that the disagreement between Rabbi Meir and the sages here, is whether the Baal Keri can recite the blessings mentally or orally, even if he's like saying it with his lips, but he's not actually saying it audibly, right? So that which is the degree for which it is, okay? Everybody agrees that you're not supposed to be saying it audibly, okay? They agree on that. There's no disagreement on that. What they disagree on it is, should you be saying with your lips so that you don't hear it, or should you be actually just reading it and reviewing it mentally, okay? So there's a very slight nuance difference between the two, but the main part that is not said audibly, that there's no disagreement on. Now, we're talking about the law of the Baal Keri, who's not able to immerse himself because he doesn't have water, okay? Now, the Gemara is going to talk about a brisa regarding a sick person who's unable to immerse himself for health reasons, okay? So, some of the idea here would be maybe that the water is too cold for the person, okay? So, this is a day before we had modern conveniences of warm water and things like that. And, if they were transporting water from a spring, it would be really cold in certain times of the year and probably would not be good for a sick person. So the Gemara is going to continue and it's going to say that a Beraisa teaches that a sick Baal Keri, upon whom 9 cabin of water fell, or a Tahor person upon whose head and the greater part of his body 3 luggin of drawn water fell, is Tahor for himself. So I want to point out that drawn water is talking about water that's contained in a vessel, and it's not fit for a mitzvah. Now, there's different types of water, there's different levels of water, and the sages are decreeing that if a tov yom, a person who was tamei that day but had already immersed himself, rinses himself in at least 3 luggin of drawn water, he becomes a sheni latuma, and then he disqualifies truma on contact. And the reason for this decree is that originally the tamei person immersed himself in a pool in a cave water where it would be stagnant and maybe a little bit smelly. And following that immersion, then they would pour drawn water over themselves in order to clean themselves from the cave water. And after a while, people assumed that it was not the cave water that affected the purification, but the water of this drawn water, like the water of a shower, okay? So that to dispel this notion, the rabbis decreed that if a Tov Yom washes himself in 3 lugin of drawn water, he becomes a sheni latuma until he immerses himself again, so that you know, we can see here why it's so important to study Torah, because you can end up thinking that, if you're tameh, you can just go into the shower and you'll be fine, okay? And this is said by Amaratzim who try to read this, right? This is not what we're talking about. What affected the purification was going into the cave water, okay? And then you're washing yourself with these 3 lugin of drawn water because the cave water smelled, or it was stale, stagnant water, and it's gross to have on your skin. The pouring the water over yourself is because it's kind of like a necessity. You kind of feel gross from it, so that the just sitting there and going and taking the shower is not what's fixing you, right? So that you're still going to contaminate truma and things like that if you only did the 3 lugin of drawn water. He's a sheni latuma, okay, and he's going to contaminate stuff like kodashim. So the other thing about it is that after he goes and he goes into this cave and then he immerses, he can now study Torah and pray. And so Ezra, he required the Baal Keri to immerse himself in 40 seah. And Ezra made an exemption in the case of a sick person, and that was to allow him to rinse with just 9 kavin. So the Haredim is saying that about the Bavli in 22b that that would be following the view of Abaya, and Rava holds that the leniency for the sick person was not enacted by Ezra, but by the rabbis of a later period, and the law of a sick Baal Keri is going to be elaborated below. So what I just want to point out that that the purification of 9 kavin has no effect on biblical tuma of the Keri, by the way. Okay, the tuma can only be removed through immersion in a valid mikvah of 40 seah. Now, presumably, when the guy is going into the cave, okay, before he washes himself with the 3 lugin of water, that he went into something with 40 seah. The only way to get the tuma off of you is you can't go into a shower, okay? You got to go into a mikvah of 40 seah. And then, if you want to wash yourself with the 3 lugin of drawn water, okay, that's another story. But when we're talking about the 3 lugin of drawn water, don't think that you can just go into a shower today, turn on for 3 lugin, and that you're going to be okay. And that's what this Gemara is talking about. It's not, okay? This Gemara is talking about that if after they've already gone, and then you see people taking the drawn water and pouring the water over yourself, that pouring the water over yourself, okay, that's not what triggered the becoming tahor. It was the cave water, okay, so as not to confuse people. And I've heard Dati Light Amaratzim say that, the Gemara says that you can just go into a shower, put 3 lugin of water on, and you're tahor, and then, by the way, and then extrapolate it out for women as well. Okay, so this is not what the Gemara says. It's really not. It's not what the Gemara means, and this is why you should be very careful when you listen about Torah from Amaratzim, because they mix things up and they don't put in the time, and worse yet, they think they know and they don't. So Rabbi Yehuda says and clarifies this and says 40 seah in any matter. So manner. So, what it says is, what it actually is saying, upon whose head, and the greater part of his body, 3 lugin of drawn water fell, is to whore for himself. And that basically means that, he can study Torah and pray, and that he cannot cause the public to fulfill their obligation until he enters 40 seah of water, and Rabbi Yehuda says 40 seah in any manner. In other words, that you have to go into the Baal Keri has to go into a valid mikvah, and after that valid mikvah, if he had 3 lugin of drawn water poured over him because maybe the water was cave water, the rabbis decreed that one who takes a shower after immersion becomes tamei again, almost as though he had never immersed himself. So, given the rabbinic nature of the stringency, it was not fully applied with respect to the restriction of the Baal Keri. And despite showering in 3 lugin, the Baal Keri remains permitted to study Torah and recite the blessings for himself, and his previous immersion becomes invalid only in the sense that he reverts to his previous restriction in as much as he cannot recite prayers for other people. And this is what the Haredim says. Now, the Vilna Goan is saying that only that regarding one who washes himself in 3 lugin concerns only the laws of Tuma and has nothing to do with Ezra's prohibition against studying Torah and praying, and that if the Baal Keri immerses himself in a valid mikvah, says the Vilna Goan, and then showers in 3 lugin of drawn water, he would become tamei, and he would not become subject to any restrictions regarding Torah and prayer. And just like any other tamei person, he may even teach Torah to others and recite prayers. That's the note by the Vilna Goan. So now let's get to what Rabbi Yehuda is talking about, and I want to bring up what the Haredim says about this. The Haredim says that the Bavli in 22b explains that Rabbi Yehuda does not refer to the Tanna Kamma's ruling. Rather, at this point, his point is that the 40 seah required for a healthy Baal Keri need not have all the qualities of a regular mikvah, but they are valid in any manner. And the interpretation of this term is a simple dispute between the Amorim. One understands this to mean that a Baal Keri may immerse himself in a vessel, whereas others hold that Rabbi Yehuda only allows the water to have been taken from a vessel, okay, but that the immersion itself must occur in the ground. At any rate, says the Pnei Moshe, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the 40 seah required for the Baal Keri may have been collected in a vessel, and that the Halacha actually follows that view, so that the Gemara is going to continue to elaborate on Ezra's enactment. And Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha and Rabbi Yasa said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Levi, it is not considered Keri or seminal discharge. It is not considered Keri, seminal discharge that affects Ezra's enactment unless it resulted from cohabitation. But if the emission was involuntary, Ezra's enactment does not apply, and there's no prohibition against studying the Torah. Now, there's going to be a dissent on that. So Rav Huna says even if one, had a discharge because he saw himself being gratified in a dream, he may study Torah before immersing himself. And the Gemara is going to define the scope of Rabbi Huna's ruling, and they're going to say that the disciples, wanted to say that an involuntary discharge would warrant immersion only if it resulted from a dream about a woman. So Pnei Moshe says here that he dreamt that he was intimate with a woman, and if, however, he dreamt that he copulated with a man or an animal. Says the Pnei Moshe, Ezra's decree would not apply because such a dream is uncommon, and the rabbis did not apply their decrees in the event of uncommon circumstances. So, it's not normal to have dreams about having relations with a man or an animal or something like that. That's very something very strange about that. So the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say that the disciples wanted to say that an involuntary discharge warrants immersion only if it resulted from a dream with a woman. And until Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yosef both said that immersion is required even where the discharge resulted from a dream about something else. The Gemara is going to challenge Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who said that Ezra's enactment applies only in the event of cohabitation. And the Gemara says that we learned in the Mishnah there on Yom Kippur, it is prohibited to engage in eating and drinking, in washing oneself and anointing one's body with oil, and in wearing shoes, and in cohabitation. And concerning this Mishnah, the Brisa teaches that the Baal Keri immerse themselves in their usual manner privately on Yom Kippur. And does this Brisa not dispute the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? So, just quick note about this. The Sfas Emes says in his book on 73b, he says that the Brisa is teaching that the Baal Keri may immerse himself even on Yom Kippur so that he will be allowed to pray. The prohibition against washing on Yom Kippur applies only when one washes for pleasure. Okay, and it would not apply when somebody's doing it for a halachic purpose, right? So that's the point about that. So the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, does this Brisa not dispute the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? For Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said that it is not considered Keri unless it resulted from cohabitation. That's the question, right? So in other words, what this is trying to get at is the Brisa would allow, this is the question, right? Would the Brisa allow a Baal Keri to immerse himself on Yom Kippur, even though his immersion did not come from cohabitation, since cohabitation is forbidden on that day? Rather, he must have become a Baal Keri from an involuntary discharge. And the Gemara would, seem to be trying to prove that, even an involuntary discharge would require immersion. And now the Gemara is going to address this, and it's going to say, interpret the Brisa as referring to one who cohabited while it was still daytime before Yom Kippur began, but he forgot and did not immerse himself then. In other words, that it's trying to construe the Brisa as where the discharge resulted from cohabitation, but he didn't yet go to the mikveh, and then the sunset happened, and now it's going to be Yom Kippur. So that's what it's talking about. They're saying that the Brisa is actually not talking about an involuntary one. So that's the note there. Now, the Gemara doesn't like that interpretation. Okay, and it's going to say that a Brisa teaches that it once happened with Rabbi Yosef ben Halafta, that they saw him immersing himself privately on Yom Kippur, and then they're going to say, now, can you ascribe forgetting to that holy person? Of course not. In other words, this is somebody who's at a very high level and is going to be very stringent on himself. He definitely didn't forget if he had relations with his wife on the afternoon before Yom Kippur, he wouldn't have forgotten to go to the mikveh. So what happened, it must be that it was going to be from an involuntary discharge. In other words, we're compelled to say that it was an involuntary discharge on the night of Yom Kippur itself, and this would seem to prove, that what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying is not necessarily going to be the case. That, in other words, that immersion is going to be required even in the case of involuntary discharge. Perhaps Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would not even dispute this, and he would be talking about in the case of somebody who was getting ready for Yom Kippur, before the sunset happened, and he was with his wife in the afternoon, and maybe he didn't have time to go to the mikveh, or he forgot that's what the law would be, and perhaps what this other bryce is talking about is a case where there was an involuntary discharge, and in this way there'd be no contradiction at all. They're just talking about two different aspects of the law. That could be what's happening here. They might not actually be arguing at all. So the Gemara is going to explain why it was enacted that a Baal Keri must immerse himself. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yaakov bar Avin says the entire purpose in requiring this immersion was only so that a Jew would not become like roosters, and that he would not cohabit, get up, go down, eat as roosters do. In other words, that the Haredim says about this that the enactment has nothing to do with the laws of Tuman Tara. Rather, the purpose is to prevent people from behaving like roosters who copulate frequently, and by obligating them to go to the mikveh before praying or studying Torah or saying blessings even, basically Ezra is trying to avoid having Am Yisrael do too much cohabitation, and that this basically would put like a roadblock up, so to speak. Now, Haredim is pointing out that although this reason pertains only to an emission resulting from cohabitation, Rabbi Yaakov would agree that the decree applies to involuntary emissions as well, and Ezra's enactment may have been a general one, which included every type of seminal emission, says the Haredim. So that could be a good way to understand that. The Gemara is going to talk about an incident now. Rabbi Hanina would pass by the gates of the public bathhouses early in the morning before dawn in search of students who were absent from the study hall, and the students who were Baal Keri would wait there until the bathhouse opened and then immerse themselves before studying Torah. And the Gemara says that he said to them, "What are those who need immersion in the morning," in other words, Baal Keri, doing before the bathhouse opens? They should go and review the halachot. And the Gemara says that later in the morning he would announce whoever performed cohabitation should go and perform immersion. In other words, the Haredim explains that Rabbi Hanina maintains that a Baal Keri is permitted to review halachot before the immersion. Not only the agadic teachings, but also uttering the divine name is going to be forbidden. Therefore, he rebuked those who were waiting at the gates of the bathhouse for wasting their time because they could have been reviewing halachot. In other words, he was basically saying it was Batul Torah, and that they could have been productive, and they could have been waiting for the bathhouse to open, but not be there sitting there waiting. They could have been reviewing halachot and then go over a little bit later. So that's basically what Rabbi Hanina is saying, and it's saying as a clue to us that, if you're waiting for the bus, if you're sitting on the bus and you're just driving by, don't sit there and look out the windows. Open up a book in halachot, get a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, look at it, review it for a couple of seconds. Bring a book of Mishnayot, look at a couple of Mishnayot for a few seconds. Don't waste your time because you only have your time. The Mishnah now is going to teach that even though a Baal Keri may not vocalize certain prayers, he's allowed to review them in the mind. And the Gemara is going to now talk about whether this distinction between speech and thought is going to also apply when somebody goes to the bathroom, because we know that speaking sacred words is going to be forbidden. So the Gemara is going to say, is it permissible to think about matters of Torah in the bathroom? This is going to be a big question. In other words, and by the way, I want to point out that it doesn't matter whether the bathroom was even just cleaned. Okay, let's say you're going in and somebody spent 1 hour cleaning the bathroom and it's immaculate and there's nothing wrong there in the bathroom. Okay, totally clean. I mean, it is a marble bathroom that is shining from having just been cleaned. There's only bleach smell. Everything is good. Okay, this is what it's talking about. All right, are you going to be allowed to even think about these matters? And Gemara is going to answer, and it's going to say that Hizkiah said it is permissible, and Rabbi Yassa said it is prohibited. The Gemara now is going to give a couple of statements to support Hizkiah's view. The Gemara says that Rabbi Zera said, all the difficult thinking I did there. And Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon said, all the difficult thinking that I did about the laws of Tovel Yom, I did there. So you can find a long discussion about that in Bavli Zevachim 102b. And Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon is going to explain why the Mishnah over there is going to rule that a Kohen who's a Tovel Yom cannot claim a share in the day's offerings to eat the coming night when he'll become Tahor. So basically, by citing Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon's statement without a comment, the Gemara is attributing him to the view that thinking matters of Torah in a lavatory would be permitted. Now, the Bavli is going to ask, how could they do such a thing? And it's going to answer that he was a victim of unavoidable circumstance over there. In other words, they're going to say that he was concentrating on studies so much that when he entered, he was unable to interrupt his train of thought. That's going to be the Bavli over there. Now, you have a little bit of a disagreement here between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, and there's probably a lot of ways to reconcile the two of them, so there's no disagreement. But in practical halacha, they're going to rule on the Bavli that thinking about matters in the Torah are going to be forbidden, and you can check the Shulchan Aruch in 85.2 for that. Also, it's going to follow the laws from the Rambam, Hilchos Kriyas Shema 3.4. So the Gemara is going to return to the main topic, and a Baal Keri his obligation to immerse himself before saying sacred words. And Rabbi Acha said in the name of Tanchum, the son of Rabbi Chia, in the days of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, they wanted to uproot the obligation of immersion because of the woman of Galil who would become barren due to the cold. And in this story, it was taught in a Mishnah that the women, after cohabiting, are also required by Ezra's decree to immerse themselves before they pray. And in the north, in Eretz Yisrael, where the lake is, the temperatures would get to be very cold. And the Haredim says that some women would become barren from going to immerse too frequently in the super cold water. And another comment about that is that the mikvahs, says in Marafulda, the mikvahs in those days were usually situated in caves and other cold places, and they were not heated or rarely heated, so that if you're going into something that's too cold, it could make somebody infertile, and it was basically turning the women barren. And what did they do, right? So Gemara says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to them, "Do you want to uproot something that protects Jews from sin?" Gemara asks, "What is it about the enactment that protects Jews from sin?" And the Gemara is going to answer with a narrative. It's going to say that an incident occurred with a watchman of the vineyards who sought to cohabit with a married woman. And while they were preparing themselves a place where they could immerse themselves after the act, people going to and passing by noticed them, and consequently the sin was abandoned. And the Gemara is going to talk about another story in which Ezra's enactment prevented also wrongful cohabitation. And the Gemara is going to say that an incident took place when one who sought to cohabit with the Canaanite slave woman of Rebbe, and she said to him, "If my mistress is not immersing herself, am I not immersing myself?" That is, I am unable to immerse myself except when my mistress does so. And since I do not know when I will be able to immerse myself, I will not cohabit with you. So basically, you know, Pnei Moshe is saying that, since she had not immersed herself in the past, she was forbidden to be with a man as a nida. Basically, what Pnei Moshe is saying that. And then the Gemara says that he said to her, "Are you not like an animal who has no need for an immersion?" And she retorted to him, "Did you not hear that one who cohabits with an animal is stoned?" In other words, what he's saying is that Ezra's enactment did not apply to a Canaanite slave woman, and that this is untrue, however, and a Canaanite slave woman is going to be included in all the laws that apply to a free Jewish woman. So the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say that, as it is stated, anyone who lies with an animal shall surely be put to death, and this clever response succeeded basically in halting his advances. In other words, she outsmarted him, and this is a quote from Exodus 22:18, and she responded on the premise of his false premise in order to outsmart him. And the Gemara is going to say that before it was thought that the aim of Ezra's enactment was to prevent excessive cohabitation, and now the Gemara is going to give a different reason for this decree, and the Gemara is going to say that Rabbi Shia Barva said their entire purpose in requiring the immersion was only to prevent the neglect of Torah study, for if you tell a student he is allowed to study Torah immediately after marital relations, he will surely say, "I will surely go and satisfy my needs," and he will cohabit with his wife before studying, planning to come back and learn his full share. And such a plan is going to be likely to go astray. In other words, that the Rosh Cirilio is pointing out that the act of cohabitation will result in his being too tired to learn afterwards. So the Gemara continues and says, "But once you tell him that it is permitted to study Torah after marital relations, he will be deterred from excessive cohabitation, and instead he will come and truly learn his full share." And the Mara Fulda's point about this is that the obligation to immerse himself will encourage him to avoid the cohabitation when he should be studying. So the Gemara is going to define the extent to which the Baal Keri is prohibited to study Torah, and the Gemara says that they said there in Bavli, that a Baal Keri is forbidden even to hear the words of the Torah. And basically, a Baal Keri is permitted to think sacred words, but he may not hear them, because hearing is going to be the legal equivalent of speaking. So over there in Bavel, by specifying that the prohibition against hearing the words of Torah, it would imply that it's not going to be accepted over in Eretz Yisrael. In other words, when they're saying that they said there that a Baal Keri is forbidden to hear even the words of Torah, the idea is that perhaps this ruling is not going to be accepted in Eretz Yisrael. So what's going to be the source of this ruling? And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yudah bar Titus said, in the name of Rabbi Acha, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, when the Torah was originally given at Sinai, the people only heard its words, yet they had to be pure from the Tumah of Keri, as it is written, "Be prepared for 3 days and do not approach a woman." And therefore, Ezra's decree, which was patterned after this law, restricts even hearing the words of Torah. So I want to point out something here that also is in the Bavli parallel 21b, and that the conceptual precedent for Ezra's decree barring the Baal Keri from Torah study is going to be a divine command issued at Sinai that prohibited marital intimacy for 3 days before receiving the revelation of Har Sinai. And this command served to ensure that all men and women would be pure from the tomb of Keri when they received the Torah. So, really a deep idea about what's going on here. In other words, that the need for purity of hearing Torah at that level was actually issued by divine command. That is really, really an amazing thing, because they're hearing the words of the Torah at Har Sinai, and because of this having to hear the words at Har Sinai, that they can't receive them in a state of Tuma. And it's going to be another ruling that emerges about this precedent from Har Sinai, that a Baraisa teaches that Zavim, Zavos, Nidos, and women who have given birth may read from the Torah and learn Midrash, Halachot, and even Agadic teachings. However, a Bale Keri is prohibited to learn any of them. So, what's going on over here? So, the Chasei David says in the commentary in Bavli 22b, which is the parallel for this, says that the first four categories of people, Zavim, are similar to a Bali Keri in that they are tameh on account of a bodily discharge. Nevertheless, only a Bali Keri is forbidden to study Torah because his tuma is generated from a form of frivolity inconsistent with the sense of awe and respect required for one who studies God's law. And this distinction is derived from the revelation at Sinai, where measures were taken to ensure that everyone would be free from the tomb of Keri, but no such concern existed with other types of tuma. So that's a really, really amazing idea, and that's really an amazing idea. Now, the Gemara is going to have a dissenting view on that. It's going to say Rabbi Abba Bar Acha says in the name of Rebbe that he may review halachot, but he may not review agadas. Why would that be? Pnei Moshe is saying that agadah is going to be like a narrative or a poetic expression that attracts a person's attention, and it's going to stimulate him to ponder and investigate many mysteries. So that the Gemara is going to resume this Baraisa, and it's going to say that the Baraisa also teaches that they said in the name of Rabbi Yossi that a Bale Keri may review halachot with which he is familiar as long as he does not elaborate the reasoning behind the Mishnah. So why would that be? Because Mishnahs that he can do fluently without delving into their meaning are going to be okay, and the Pnei Moshe points out is that he may not probe into its depth, but just get a superficial view over it. Now, there's going to be a different version of Rabbi Yossi's statement. Gemara says that there are those who wish to say that Rabbi Yossi said that a Bale Keri may review halachot with which he is familiar as long as he does not mention the divine names. And the Sidei Yeshua, great Yerushalmi commentator, says that this opinion holds that a Bale Keri may even elaborate the reasoning behind the Mishnah, provided he does not mention the divine names. And that's a good point. The Gemara is going to record another incident in which sages allowed a Bale Keri to study Torah before immersion. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Zera asked before Rabbi Yasa, does this teacher not learn the chapters with me and Rabbi Bun every night before dawn, even though one of us may be a Bale Keri and not yet immersed himself? The Gemara says Rabbi Yasa answered to him, yes. In other words, what they're saying is that the commentators offer different reasons why the sages permitted some study before immersion. One explanation is that they were reviewing familiar halachot, and that's going to be another case. Now, there could be another way to read this, that perhaps immersion at night is going to be dangerous, and that that's why you would have the permit to study before daybreak. That's the deep insight by Rabbi Kanievsky in his Beur shiurim. And The Gemara is going to give another incident. It's going to say that Rabbi Chia bar Abba learned the chapter with Nehemiah, his son, at night before dawn, and later in the morning he would say to his son, whoever performed cohabitation should go and perform immersion. So, in other words, that the sage held that a Baal Keri may learn before daybreak because immersion is going to be dangerous in the dark, and that they're also probably also learning familiar halachot. That's probably also, a thing about the substance of what's being learned. And there's going to be another incident. It's going to say that a Baraisa teaches that it once happened that someone who was a Baal Keri stood up to read from the Torah in Netzivim. When he reached the divine name, he began to stammer it. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Besira said to him, open your mouth and let the words shine forth, for the words of the Torah do not contract tuma. That is, that a Baal Keri need not immerse himself before learning Torah. So that we have an idea that the Torah itself does not become temeh, and that the Mara Fulda is pointing out that the person followed the opinion that a Baal Keri who did not yet go to the mikveh may recite words of Torah, provided he does not say the divine name. Now, the divine name is so holy that it's above these levels of tuma. That's the point that this Bryce is pointing out. And I want to point out another thing that by the Rambam is pointing out that the majority of Jewish people did not accept Ezra's decree, and therefore it never became binding. So that's the point by the Rambam on this, and that there are some Rishonim who assert that the decree was rescinded only with respect to Torah study, but not prayer. But this view is not widely accepted. But there are today even people who do observe Ezra's decree, and that's brought up in the Mishnah Beur 88.4. So if you want to learn more about it, you can learn more about it there in 88.4 Mishnah Beur. And the Gemara is gonna basically get into more cases about things that contract tuma and things that don't, and we're going to get into trying to understand more depth with why it is that the Baal Keri can be so problematic, and why we need, when we're hearing words of Torah, that we need to try to be in a holy state, why kedusha matters. So have a great day.